All right, so if you get finished with the bouncing ball, I'm going to show the rigging stuff so that you can get started on that as well. That way, while your stuff is rendering, you can look around the room, see there's several extra stations in here that are not being used. Plenty of space for you to actually use another station to start the rigging one if you would like. Where's my thing go? There it is. You're using this, it's not the iMac rig. All right, so on Canvas will be the robot rig. You'll download the file, you'll unzip it, put it into your folder. This is the, you'll put your name on there, so it'll say your last name, robot, whatever. You'll get the source images and you'll get the scene for it. He does come textured, but his texture is not wanting to update. So let me delete all my history real quick on this. And I think this one wants to be the reloader. Nope. It's under my geometry in this one, and then reload, generate, and then set this to raw. I think that would do it. Maybe. 5, 6. Oh, I don't know why his texture's not showing up, but it'll render, whatever. All right. So that's eventually what we're going to render. So today we're not going to go over the specifics of how to render or how to full-blown rig him. We're going to go over the essentials of how do you rig stuff and what it means and what tools can we use, and then we'll kind of touch on how to get started with him, okay? So that's what we're going to be rigging and then doing a little animation with. All right, so in Maya there's a rigging menu. So this is all the stuff that goes into rigging, plus there's a whole bunch of other stuff. The main thing with any kind of rigging that we do is we have geometry or something, and we're trying to find a better way to control it versus just kind of manually grabbing stuff and moving it around. If I didn't close that, let me reopen this. If I wanted to, like, let's say move his arm, and I just rotate his shoulder, obviously nothing goes with it. If I grabbed everything and his shoulder, and then let's say I grouped it, and then I rotated it, you can see that his shoulder moves. And then I say, okay, well now I want to rotate his forearm. So then I would grab all that stuff and group it and move the pivot and blah, blah, blah. This is a very inefficient way to do it. So Maya has tools that allow us to do this much, much nicer. A lot of it is going to be based off of joints, okay? So whether we're using a organic model or a hard surface model, we'll do both. We'll be starting off typically with joints. Oops, wrong button, come on, there we go. So I'm going to turn off my, turn to my front view, and anytime I draw joints, I go into my front view or my side view or my top view. These are what joints are, and the main idea behind them is that they're a parenting structure, okay? So if you've used After Effects before, you've heard of nulls. Imagine just a chain of nulls, and all we're going to be doing is connecting objects to these nulls so that we can have things move around, okay? So this one here, let's say that this is like a shoulder joint, and then this is the forearm. Let me delete the rest of them. I can grab the shoulder and rotate it. I can grab the forearm and rotate it. Okay. I could even have obviously ones for each one of my digits here. Anywhere I would be bending something or rotating something, that's where I would want to have a joint. And that's where you really have to pay attention to getting it exactly where it would rotate from. If I'm rigging a character and I put the joint here and not right at the elbow, that's going to make a huge difference because my character will bend from like the middle of the forearm, and that won't work, okay? Even so far as your fingers, you bend kind of from the top of your finger, not necessarily right in the middle. So it's more in the top than it is the middle. Same thing with like your wrist and everything. So there's different pivot points that we'll have to pay attention to when we get to it, okay? So this is going to be the main focus of this, is creating joints and then taking objects. So that's a forearm, or that's a bicep. There we go. Yeah, that's a forearm. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take these and parent them to each one. Now what normally confuses people is the way that we select these. So this thing right here, that is the joint. That's like the shoulder joint right there. The thing that would run down it, they call that the bone. If you grab the bone, it will all grab the joint above it. You can see how the joints, if I hide my geometry, you can see how the joints have kind of like a direction to them. So it's showing you what's on top based on where the thickest part of that bone is. So this shoulder joint, that's the thickest part. That's the highest one. And then this one goes here. And then this one doesn't have anything connected to it. So that's just the end joint. Okay, so as I do this, I always make sure that I click on the joint itself, or I click right on the bone for that joint. So if I click here, it'll select the joint above it. If I click here, it'll select the joint above that. Okay, if I click this, it'll select all the joints down the chain from it, right? So if I grab the shoulder joint, it'll also grab the elbow, it'll also grab the wrist, it'll also grab each one of the finger joints. That's why the whole thing is highlighting. There's also a difference between me clicking on this and then holding shift and then clicking on that as well. So you see one's yellow and one's white and one's green. If I rotate them, you'll see how they both rotate together. If I grab them in this order, because I selected the bottom one first, it's green, and then I grab the top one, it's green still. But both joints are still selected because I've selected both joints, okay? So in this way, people do get confused because they see in my screen I may have all green and you think that I have just this selected. Just that selected is going to move different than when both of these are selected. Oops. Okay, so just pay attention to that. Usually that's what trips people up, is making sure they're selecting on the actual joint. The joints do have priority over everything else, so if I were to just marquee inside my scene, it selected that top joint, okay? So if I had a full-blown character and I marquee the entire character, what's going to get selected is the highest joint in the chain. Typically, it's going to be like your pelvis joint. Same thing here. So you'll see a lot of times where I marquee something, and I'll just do this to select the joint, where I'm just drawing a big marquee box over that joint to get it. Okay? Again, it's just one of those things that will trip you up. The other thing that will trip people up is parenting order. So when I parent something to joints, I click on the geometry first, I shift-click the joint, and then I hit P to parent it. I can verify it in my outliner because the geometry is now inside the joint group. I can open it up and see it. There it is. Click the geometry, shift-click the joint, hit P, and it parents it. If you do it the other way, if I click the joint first and then click the piece of geometry and parent, nothing happened there as far as like visually in the scene. We didn't see anything different. If I do it here, notice how now that bone from the shoulder to the elbow is now gone, because the joints work because each joint down the chain is parented to the one above it. So when I parent it to something else, well, that chain is broken, so it doesn't work anymore. Okay? So pay attention to that kind of stuff as you're working on your stuff. So I'm just going to create here. All right, we talked about this before, forward kinematics. If I grab both joints and I rotate them, that's called forward kinematics. If I grab the IK handle tool and I grab the shoulder joint, grab the wrist joint, and move this, this is inverse kinematics. Whenever I do this, I'm creating a separate handle that I'm using to move the arm around. On more advanced rigs, you'll see that they use forward and inverse for their arms and their legs. Like there's two ways that you could animate it as you're going. Some things make more sense this way. Something like a leg or a hand, it makes more sense for me to be able to just grab my character's hand and put it there. Something like the spine doesn't make sense to have that. Because your spine, I would never grab someone's spine and just set them over somewhere. Typically, I would just rotate the spine, okay? As you think about rigging, think about how this thing is going to move. When you're moving your arm, you're not physically moving any of your bones, like translating any of your bones. All that stuff happens by rotation. When I do this, I'm rotating my shoulder joint. When I do this, I'm rotating my elbow. When I do that, I'm rotating my wrist. Okay? The same thing happens when we rig a character. There's very few times where we would actually grab a joint and actually physically move it. If I were to grab this, let's say that's the wrist, and I did that, it would stretch my character's wrist out. Here, Jeff. If I did this and move it, it would stretch the bicep out. Okay? So we typically never do that. There's only one joint that we would typically go and actually move, and that would be the pelvis. Because that way we can kind of position where we have the character kind of sitting or squatting or whatever. Okay? Everything else we would not move the position on. Okay, so just so you can see, this is, I think, where I'm at. And that, and this, and that. There we go. All right, so with the robot here, I have all of these joints inside him. So if I go to polygons, so here's the joint structure for him. So the way that I had to set it up is I have to look, where is he rotating from? Mechanical things like this are nice because typically they're going to have a hinge that's going to allow them to rotate. So typically you'll see like this is the exact spot it should rotate from. If you get into more advanced stuff, you may, maybe trickier to find, but they're always going to be there. There it is. Right? So even something as complex as like a convertible top going from closed to open, there's a lot of moving pieces that fit into that. But if you break it down into where the hinges are, where it's supposed to move from, the whole process of rigging becomes a lot easier because then you can understand this is exactly how it's going to move. When you look at a person and you're trying to figure out where things rotate from, trying to find the exact spot in the shoulder where someone would rotate their arm from can be a bit tricky, okay? So that's why we're starting off with the robot because it's very easy to do. So I'm going to switch to my polygon so we can take a look at this and see. Here's his elbow. So you can see that there's an exact like hinge rotation area right there that his elbow would be rotating from. Here's his wrist. He has an exact sphere that allows him to rotate his wrist. On each one of his fingers, he has these things that allow him to rotate each one of his fingers. Okay, now if any one of these joints are off even by a hair, as he rotates those, it's going to cause intersections, it's going to cause some stuff to not work correctly. And here's his shoulder, same thing. Even as I was modeling this, I have to look at how he's going to be rigged so that my model lines up with how he's going to be rigged. So if I decided, oh, I want to put, let's say I wanted the shoulder way up here and I wanted this thing for whatever reason way down here, that could cause some issues in how I set up the rig because the shoulder and the forearm and everything else is kind of like off. So a lot of that comes into play as you're working with this. Or if I had, here's his bicep. If this was way up here, that would also change where this is rotating from for that. Okay? Now, this robot doesn't have a spine. He's basically just like a box. He has legs, he has arms, and he has a head. So there's no spine movement in here. That's why in the very center, let's keep this up and over here. In the very center, there's only one joint. So that's his like center point. That would be considered his pelvis in this case. And then here's each of his legs. Here's each of his feet. And then here are each of his toes. Same thing with the fingers and the hands. You can see where those are at. Typically, when you make a character that you're going to be rigging, you want them to be in a somewhat in a very symmetrical pose, but also a relaxed pose. So I wouldn't want my robot like doing pull-ups or something because that's like his arms are straight up in the air. I have him like this because it's very easy to get all of my stuff lined up perfectly. As I start rigging the fingers and getting these to move correctly, then it makes it easier when I get to that stage. Okay? Even his thumb, I would never have his thumb off at that 90-degree angle, but it'll make it easier to rig. Okay, so all of that goes into setting this guy up to rig so that that works. Now to get these into the correct spot, open number 5, I think it is. I used these things. Oops, turn that off, turn my joints off. There we go. Okay, so I wanted to have some way for me to easily drop the joints exactly where I need to without a lot of issues. If I switch this off, so let me switch off my locators. Actually, I'll just throw these on a layer. That'll be easier to turn off. There we go. And I'll turn everything else on. There we go. All right. So if I go in here and I'm creating joints for this, typically your first joint that you create is going to be right in the center. Oops. I've turned off my joints so they're not showing up. There we go. It's going to be right in the center. Because this is a box, it doesn't matter where his first joint is. I just need some central way to select the entire thing. So it could be way back here, it could be up here, it could be down there. It doesn't matter. So somewhere around there. The next joint I do needs to be at the exact center of this. So we learned last class the hotkeys. Remember the hotkey for snapping to point? V. So if I hold down V and I click on this, it will snap the joint right to that point there. Okay, so now I'll come down to here, and there's another pivot point right there. That's where the foot is going to rotate. So hold down V again, click. And then I need one for the toes, so this one doesn't matter so much. I'll just click there. There we go. So now if I come in here, you'll see what this looks like. The joints are actually like outside of the arm or the leg. When I get up here to the elbow, you can see there is, oops, that's my placeholder. There you go. There isn't an exact spot in the very center of this that we'd be able to snap to, okay? And then the same thing for the fingers, or not the fingers, the same thing for the wrist. There's no exact center point. I mean, this is the center point right there, so maybe I could use that. When I get here, there's no exact center point like a crosshair that I'd be able to click on. So I always have to look at that when I'm starting to draw joints as to the easiest way to do that. So I usually enlist locators to get me there when I'm deleting stuff. So this is what I do when I lay out joints for any of my stuff. I go to Create, I go to Locator, and then this is a locator. It's a nothing object, it won't render, it's there to be just a helper for you. I'm going to use my snapping to snap it to these pieces. So I'm going to make sure I have all my arrows are red, green, and blue. There we go. I'm going to hold down V and middle mouse button click and drag over here, and it'll snap right to the center of that. Now if I can't see the center, which I can't, I'm going to turn on my wireframe, and then I can see, yes, I snapped it exactly to that spot. I need this to be, or in this case it doesn't need to be in the exact center of the foot, but it definitely helps. So I want this to be centered right inside the foot, so I'm going to go to my front view, and I believe this line right, come on, here is the exact center of that foot. So if I grab that and I move this over using my snap to point to the right, that's exactly lined up where that should be. Okay, so it's right in the center of where this item would rotate from. Okay, so now I'm going to take this and duplicate it and scoot it up, and I'm going to line it up with this. Now because I know this is already centered left and right wise, I just need to move it up and maybe forward. If I hold down V and just drag the arrow, it'll snap it right to that point. And I'll hold down V, grab this arrow, and move my mouse to this point, and it snaps right there. So now those two locators in the exact spot that I need them. Then I'm going to duplicate the locator, And now I need to get this centered on the sphere for the shoulder. So I'm going to get some help with this. So I'm going to go to Modify, Snap Align, Align Objects option box. And I'm going to say align the midpoints of these two items, X, Y, and Z, using the last selected object. So I selected the locator, I shift-clicked the sphere, and now I hit Align, and it'll move that exactly in the center of it. Okay? Now I know this is a perfect sphere, so that will work. If this was an oval, maybe one side's longer than the other, it wouldn't work. Okay? And that really wouldn't work for rotating. Something to consider, right? So if my shoulder's a ball joint, and let's say it's like a football shape, how is that going to rotate in the shoulder socket? Okay? I'll go to the top view here. You'll find that you'll bounce around this entire scene as you're working on it. I'm going to duplicate that locator and scoot it over to the elbow. Now in your scene file, you'll see a placeholder. The placeholder is basically the center of this. So if I hold down V and snap this, it'll snap right to the center of that cylinder right here. And the whole purpose of that is just so I have a center point. And then I'm going to slide it down so that it's in the middle of the arm. And again, I'm looking for some line that will travel down the middle of this. I believe this line right here is the middle. So if I hold down V and I click and drag, that gets me right to the middle. It might take a minute or two for you to kind of understand that process and get it lined up perfectly. But keep practicing and you'll get it. I'm going to do the same thing here. Modify, Snap Align, Align Objects. There we go. I'm going to duplicate that. I duplicate it every time so that it's easier to get it in position. So that thumb one works. This one works. These are all really, perfectly round items, so I don't have to worry about lining it up perfectly that way. Move this to the center of that. Go to my top view and line it up with the center of this. I'm going to duplicate, line this up. Oops. Line this up with the center of that, duplicate it, line this up with the center of that. And I'm just dragging that arrow forward. That way it still stays in the center of the finger and still stays like perfectly lined up exactly where I need it. Okay? Now if you skimp on this step, don't even bother finishing the rig because it's going to be a disaster. Okay. Let's shrink this down. These are way too big now. I don't need that so big. All right, so there we go. So now I'm going to go to my top view. You'll notice that the index finger is shorter than the middle finger and the pinky is shorter than that. So I have to place these all individually. Except for this one, all three of these are in line. So if I just duplicate this, hold V and snap it, duplicate it, hold V and snap it, that should be good for that one. This one I'm going to duplicate, hold V and snap it this way. And then I'm going to switch to perspective and hold V and line it up and down, and then line it up that way. So again, it's going to be a little bit tricky because if you haven't been practicing your snapping, it just is tricky. There we go. So I can take this one and duplicate it. And don't worry about where the mouse is or where the arrow is. Worry about what you're snapping it to. That's where the mouse should go. So I'm moving my mouse to that intersection right here at the center of this. So the center of that, that's where I'm always moving my mouse to make sure it snaps right to that. Cool. So that's all the fingers. I'm going to duplicate these one more time and just bring them up to the tips. Okay. The tip ones, we have a joint here. We don't use it for anything except for visually. I like to have some sort of bone going between those. Okay. So I keep that there. Same thing for the thumb. I'm going to duplicate it and slide it down to there. There we All right, so that's that side, and then I'm going to go to the neck. I'm going to duplicate it. There should be a sphere right here, but it's kind of like a, what's it called in the back of your car? A hitch. It's like a hitch. So that snaps there. I'll switch to my side view, snap it this way. Totally didn't snap it vertically correctly, so let's go. And this is going to be, some of these things are hard to see, so you just get in there and look. There we go. All right, so that's good there. And then I'm going to duplicate it again and just move it up, okay? Just like the fingertip ones don't do anything, this one in the middle of the head won't do anything except for give me something to attach the head to, okay? So now if I hide my geometry and I look at all of these, you'll see I basically have the foot. I need one for the toes, so let me just duplicate that real quick and just move that out. Oops. So I have the center one here. Put that at 0. Move this up. There we go. Oh, come on. So there's the pelvis one that I just kind of arbitrarily placed. Here's the ones for the feet, shoulders, elbow, wrist, and then all the ones for the fingers and thumb. I have the neck, and then I have the very top of the head, okay? Now to get the other side, because obviously we need the other side, I would group all of the ones on that side. Oops, I forgot the feet. Group all those, duplicate them, and then I'll negative scale them in the X. And that will automatically pop them to the other side. Now just as a checking, that's all I'm using the other side for, okay? So I'm going to turn my polygons back on. Just look and verify that it's pretty close. I don't need it to be accurate because if it's close enough, it'll be accurate. Usually what happens is people do something like this, and now that joint is no longer centered, and that's going to screw up everything, okay? Cool. So now that I have that, then I go through and I need to create all the joints for this. So I'm going to go to my Create Joints. And I start at the very center. So this is the pelvis. I hold down V and I snap there. Then I'm going to go to this foot and I'm just holding V and just snapping at each one of these. Okay, so now that gives me the pelvis, the hip, the ball of the foot, and then the toes. Then I'm going to use the up arrows to get back to the pelvis. Now I'm going to hold V again, click on the shoulder, click on the elbow, click on the wrist. Again, it might get kind of confusing here, but just follow one line. I'm holding V and just clicking on each one of those. There we go. Using the up arrows to get back to the wrist. Holding V again. Using the up arrows again to get back to the wrist. Using the up arrows again. And then up arrows all the way back to the beginning. And that way I can put in the neck and the head. Okay. If our character had a full-blown spine, we would actually go through and figure out, let's say it's a robot spine, we'd figure out where each one of those spine pieces is rotating from, and we would have another joint following along that. Okay, so think of something like Transformers or any movie that has a robot in it. Typically they have like more humanistic movement to them. Every single one of those areas would have literally a joint. And your spine is like a whole column of joints. Each one of those areas would have a joint going along it, okay? Now, I don't need to do both sides of this. What I'm going to do, or what I do, is I do one side, and then I flip it over to the other side. That way my life is a lot easier as far as naming goes. I'm going to hide my locators right there. And I'm going to go through and start naming these. Find a naming convention that will work for you, write it down, and then stay consistent with how you name stuff. So if you write out the word left, and then you put an underscore, and then you put hip. So I did left underscore hip. The left was lowercase, the underscore was underscore, and the hip was capital. The next thing I label should be labeled in a similar fashion. So when I go to the next joint here, I would label this left underscore foot. And then I would grab the toes, and I would call it left underscore toes. Okay. So far, so good? No, it's not. So I've labeled all these left. These are my left. Those are not his left, right? So everything that we label should be on his right is his right. His left is his left, okay? So all of these should be right. Okay, so right hip, right underscore foot, oops, and then right underscore toes. Okay, I do the same process straight down the line. The shoulder, elbow here. When I get to the fingers, typically I do base, mid, tip. That's how I label the joints in the finger. Base, mid, tip. He doesn't have a fourth joint. Base, mid, wait a minute. Base, mid, tip. Yeah, and I just don't can't name that one at all. Same thing here, base, mid, tip. Okay. When you get to stuff in the center, like the pelvis, you just call it pelvis or neck or whatever. And this is why we do this, is because I'm going to delete these ones because I already have this. I'm going to delete this half and delete that half. Yeah. Oh, I did add in this one, just so you can see it. I went right from here to this. Perfectly fine to do that. You can go right from there. But just for kind of makes it look a little nicer, I added a second joint right there. It doesn't do anything except make it a little bit easier to kind of go across. That's all it does. Okay, so you don't have to add that one. All right, so for these, you'll see how I labeled this, RT underscore shoulder. RT index 3, 2, 1. So this is the one I labeled 1, 2, 3. And I think that's 4, yeah. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then pinky 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then thumb 1, 2, 3. All right, so once I have the one side done and everything's labeled correctly, then I can grab one at a time. There we go. Go to skeleton, go to mirror, and it'll ask you, as I mirror this, what do you want me to rename it? So if I say, you know, find everything that says RT and change it to LT, I'm going to pick, in this case, it's the YZ plane. If you look at the pivot here, X is going across that area. So whichever one doesn't have an X, that's the one I want. YZ. I say mirror, and it mirrors it and connects it. I grab this, I hit G, does it again. Okay, so that speeds up your workflow, obviously, because you only have to do one side. Now, I said I keep those locators around because I like to double check. I'm always double checking the stuff because you don't want to get too far into your rigging process without making sure everything is perfect. So as I look at the locators here, you can see they're in the exact spot they need to be. They should be right at the center of those joints. They are. If anything is off, I need to stop, I need to fix it, and then I can progress. Rigging is not one of those things where you can just skip a step and hope it comes out later. It won't, okay? If it's not correct here, sometimes you may go ahead 20 steps and have to go back 20 steps to fix it, okay? So my locator's in a perfect spot. The biggest thing people do is are just not careful and they start moving stuff around. All right. So I'm going to delete all my locators. I don't need those anymore. I'm going to bring back my geometry there and here. Okay. So now I need to start parenting my geometry to my robot's joints. So it's not a no-brainer, but it's, if you think about it, it should be pretty obvious what goes to what after you've done it a few times. So his chest area, what should that be connected to? The pelvis, okay? So I click the chest area, I shift-click the pelvis, and then I hit P to parent it. So now it's in that group. I can double-check it. If I deselect, click on pelvis, it should grab both of those items, okay? I click on the shoulder. I'm going to shift-click on, and this is where you kind of have to make sure you have your stuff set up right. I know it's there. There's a shoulder joint. If you don't believe me, I'll just turn this layer off so you can see it. Oops, this layer. Come on, get on this layer. All right, shoulder joint. I will turn this off. There you go. So you can see the joint right there. That's what I'm going to click. Now I don't need to turn the layer off. I know that it's there because I just created it. So I should be able to just click right in the middle-ish. There it is. I see the green getting highlighted in here, so then I hit P to parent it. What about the bicep? What should that be connected to? Shoulder, right? Bicep and shoulder are moving together, so those would move together. Okay, what about forearm? Elbow. Oops. What about the wrist ball? Wrist. And then the hand? Wrist. Okay. Thumb ball and this should get connected to? Nope, the thumb ball, wherever it is. There it is. Do I have that? Yeah, that's good. Okay. And then these will get connected to that piece. Now I didn't do a step in here because I want you to see what it's going to do. Okay, so I'm going to go through this, and this is why, like I was saying, you want to make sure your stuff is set up before you proceed, because you will get errors and you have to undo stuff to fix it. Okay, so pretty much that side of the body is done. If I grab this and rotate it, the arm rotates. If I grab this and rotate it, that rotates. Also pay attention to the way that this can rotate. Okay, shouldn't rotate like that, and it shouldn't rotate like that. So stuff to be aware of. Now let's go to the fingers. So if I grab an individual finger like this and rotate it, that worked out perfect. If I go to this one and rotate, still good. If I go to this one and rotate, still good. Okay, so I'm just double checking all of these so that as I rotate them, they all rotate together. Perfect. And then we go to this, rotate, and that works. Okay, so on this one, no, pay attention for a second. Okay. All right, I'm going to grab this piece, and what would that connect to? The hip? Yeah. Yep. Or thigh, whatever you want to call that one. And then here's the foot, and that will get connected to that one. Okay. So now let's check this out. So I go here, and then I rotate it, and that works perfect. I go here to this one, and I go to rotate it, and look at that. So you can definitely see that something is off there. So as I'm rotating this, that's too big. Even though I'm grabbing just one direction, it's rotating it at this weird angle. Same thing here, that's obviously not going to work, and the same thing there. Now your hack solution might be to, well, I'm just going to rotate it like this, and then rotate it like that, and then rotate it like this, and then rotate it like that, and then move it back like this, and that's like way too much work. We literally should, the point is to make it easier to animate, right? So one of the things that we have to check as we're animating or as we're rigging our stuff, I'm just going to undo those. There you go. Are what are called local rotation axes. Okay, so the thing that I did right before I started messing around with that is I grabbed this joint and I rotated the direction that it's rotating. Okay, meaning that instead of it rotating perfectly straight, I rotated that axis, so now it's going to rotate at some weird angle. You'd want to do that for some reasons. In this case, we don't. So if I hit F8, I go to turn all these off except for the question mark. I can grab this joint, which I can obviously see is going the wrong direction, and I can rotate it and line it up perfectly with how it should be rotated. It should be perfectly flat like this and perfectly up and down like that in all directions. So if I go to my front view, and there's no like button for this, it's just a manual thing. I go to my front view, you can definitely see this line is jagged. This red line is also jagged. That means that it's not perfectly flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this until it's perfectly flat. So I'm going to start off with the green here. So I rotate it a little bit to go to the blue, do a little red, too much, do a little blue. If I make this bigger, it's easier to manipulate. It's harder to see once we get further out. All right, so that's pretty close. Come on, right there. There we go. All right, so that looks pretty close up and down. I think the blue could use a little rotation. Yep, there we go. So that's the green is now perfectly straight. The red is perfectly straight. If I switch to my side view and look at this, the red, come on a little bit. That way. Cool. So now that's perfectly straight. So that's something that I have to check before I start parenting stuff, because otherwise I have to undo all my parenting in order to fix that. Now I hit F8 to get out of there. I turn my geometry back on. And then I can go back to reparenting my stuff. This. Okay. Now let's look at what would happen if one of our joints was in the wrong spot. So barely in the wrong spot here. So let's take this, shift click that, oops. Hit P. This, shift click that, hit P. So now I'm going to grab the joint, I'm going to rotate it, and you can see right away what's happening. It's like way out. And then this joint down here is also in the wrong spot. And again, you can see pretty obvious, even though I only moved it a little bit, it's a huge difference, okay? So we have to make sure that obviously our locators are in the right spot. We create our joints, and then we go through and make sure that all the joints are oriented correctly. Even the ones on the fingers here, let me create some random joints. Okay, so pretend this is a finger joint. All of these should rotate the same way, meaning that if I rotate this down, this is going into the negative. When I go to the next one and rotate it, that one also goes negative. When I grab this one and rotate it, it goes into the negative. Okay? So that one was drawn correctly, there was no issue. Let's say I drew it incorrectly, and then I tried to fix it. So I'm just moving the joints so that they're lined up again. Okay? So that's essentially the way that it was shown before. If I grab this and rotate, number one, that looks like it's, no, it's not. So that goes negative. This one goes negative. This one goes negative. I'm just too good. Dang it. Yep. All right, just bear with me a minute. I'm going to pretend that it wasn't perfect, and I'm going to go to this. All right, so now this one should be backwards. Okay, so this one I rotate negative, this one rotates negative, then this one rotates, dang it. Try this one more time. 0, 180. There we go. So now it's going positive. Okay. So this one goes negative. This one goes negative. This one goes positive. Okay. So now this is what's going to happen if we tried to rotate all three of those joints. What should happen is it should go like that, where it curls the finger down. That's not what's going to happen, though. It's going to go, right? So it's going the opposite direction. I rotated it down, but it's going up. And then I rotate this the other way, and it goes that way, okay? So if you run into this, I have to make sure that nothing is parented to it. I hit F8. I grab the joint that's causing the problem. And you'll know it because, like I said, you go to this and you verify that all of these are rotating the same way. Usually it's one joint that's the culprit. It might be the middle one, it might be the base one. Typically, if you just kind of follow the steps, you shouldn't have an issue. So I take this, and this needs to rotate around 180 degrees. Okay? So if I look at all of these, hit F8, you'll see how this one has the Y facing up, the Z is off to the side, and the X is going down. This one, the Y is facing kind of up, the X is facing down, and the Z is off to the side. This one, the Z is like off to the side. So it has to be totally fixed, okay? So the way that we can do this is under skeleton orient joint. I'm going to say reset, and that should be good. Orient. Oops. So now you'll see the Y is facing up, the Y is facing up, the Y is facing up. The Z's are all off to the side. So that's an easy fix for that. Sometimes it doesn't work. In this model, as long as you put the locators in the right spot and you click the joints and didn't shuffle them around, it should work perfectly. You can always do that. In case it doesn't work, then sometimes you literally have to go into it. Oh, Maya's going to let freeze on me. There we go. Details. Oh, it already closed. There we go. So back before Maya crashed. Animation. Nope, rigging. Okay, so if we needed to move any of the axes around, we could go into component mode by hitting F8. We would grab the axis, and then we would just rotate it until it's lined up perfectly, so that the line right here lines up perfectly with that line, and then obviously the Y is facing the same direction, or the Z is facing the same direction. There should be a consistency from one to the other, okay? When you get to yours, obviously you'll see it. You'll rotate something, and it'll rotate the opposite direction than you think. We also have some spots, so like the pelvis here, mine is like that, good. So the pelvis here, you'll see the way he's rotating is way off. Okay, like moving him's no problem, but rotating, I want to just like twist him, but he's going like that. Okay, so for that one, I need to go to the orient. I need to say orient joint to world, and then hit that button. Now you'll notice that the second I did that, this happened. Okay, because everything is parented, it just freaks out. So I have to go through. I'm going to unparent everything. I'm going to do it the quick way just by Shift-P, unparent that. Orient the joint to the world. So now you see it's perfectly up and down. And then I'm going to take everything back and just middle drag it into there. So now he's perfectly oriented. Okay, and everything is parented correctly, and I can test it out by grabbing one of the joints and just rotating it and verifying that all the correct pieces move. And you'll see how I just marquee straight through that item, and then I can rotate it around. Even his fingers, I'll marquee straight through his fingers here, straight through his fingers there, straight through the fingers there, and rotate. Oops. And you can see how they're all moving together. There's no dislocation. It's not like flying out of there. It's not doing anything funky. It looks like it's rotating the exact way that it should be rotating for what we're doing. And again, as I modeled this, I kept in mind the fact that as he rotates backwards, he may want to rotate back slightly, but that's pretty much as far as he's going to go. There's a little lip right there where he shouldn't be able to rotate anymore. But he can rotate further going the other way. Okay, so after you're done with your bouncing ball, your next step would be download the project file, start dropping in locators where they need to be, start dropping in joints, check the joint orientation, and then you can start parenting all the stuff to it. Okay, next class I will go over the process of starting to rig him so that we can actually get stuff moving a lot easier. This process, like grabbing this and rotating that, like sucks. I don't want to have to do that. I want to have just some easy controls where I could literally go in there within a few seconds or minutes. I could create a nice cool pose with the robot, okay? He also is kind of limited with his legs because he just has like, he has no thighs. He just has that. Right. That's all he has is that.
That's what he looks like. That's what he looks like.
Yeah, so his head isn't rotating correctly, so I'm going to go into here, unparent that stuff, click the neck, orient it to the world, and then grab these two things and drop them back into the neck. And now that's happy. Cool. So I'm just going to use this. It's the same process. And then under deform, nonlinear bend, they could have just moved the points, but under this is how I would do it because it creates a nice curve to it. And then I would just delete the history, and now it's stuck like that. It's a Pringle. Or the start of a hat.